Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video, interview program that features me talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist slash secular slash awesome community. This is episode number 96. We are recording live on May 22nd, 2017. I will thank my guest from 2 weeks ago, Matt Kovics of Who Do They Say That I Am? I took a week off. I drink a lot of beer. I've found out during my vacation that a member of my extended family passed on last week. Aaron Chandler Mansell lost his battle with bipolar depression on May 16, 2017. He will be missed. When talking between believers and non-believers, we're often looking at the part of the Venn diagram that doesn't intersect. Well, sometimes we do, like tonight's guest and I regarding fantasy football and beer. Pastor Matt Rittle has been a pastor at Franklin Grove Church of the Brethren for 4 years. Actually, that might be more than that now. He'll let you know. If you want more of his nuts and bolts background, check out our first interview, episode 61. And yes, that was a prequel. If you want his long-form birth certificate, you better be ready to pay up. Thank you, Matt. Welcome back to the show. And you dressed up for me again.
I did, yeah. Got to show off for the Zachrilege.
Okay,
I'm doing the old, remember that old UK guy? He was in the suit, he looked good, and everyone's like, is he not wearing pants? So just to be clear, I'm not wearing pants, but I did put a tie on I'm wearing sweats, but put the tie on for you.
That's how it goes, you know. You just got to be professional from here to here, and here I am wearing a Penguins Stanley Cup Champions shirt.
Well,
because
no one's going to fault you for that.
I can't stay away from the sports. Because you had you on, I'm trying to remember how long ago. It was about a year ago. Probably more toward the summer or late summer. So we're going to do some out-of-context quotes from the first interview because that's fun. That book is worthless. These are my people. Thank God we came along and got it all right. Craftsmanship is always appreciated. So tonight I have two Omegang beers. They're from New York. Brunetta, a sour Bruin ale. So it's kind of a sour brown ale, which is a funky style I like. And I just like this because of what it says in the back. Where heaven met earth and stayed a while. 3 philosophers from Omegang. A quad with just a little bit of cherry. It's quite good. I've had aged versions. I've had the normal version. This is the 2016. And I like when I can get the 4-pack as opposed to the bomber because you can take your time. So you have some special cans to display?
I do. Yeah, I'm hoping I have enough now because I had about 1.5 beers when I planned it in my head, but I just finished the first, so now I have 1 beer. This is all the rage these days. I thought for you beer connoisseurs, and look at this art. Look at this art. It's incredible. So this is Pseudo Sue by Topping Goliath, I believe, in a small town in Iowa. It's a newer brewery. At least I think it's newer to the popular scene. They're killing it. It's just I've had several of their beers. It's a stunning brewery, and this is their most popular brew right now. If you're unfamiliar, Daisy Cutter is kind of the closest, but it's very good.
Yeah, I had a friend who won a lottery to go there and buy a certain, I don't remember the name of the beer, and you actually paid $200 for 3 bottles of it, and each bottle was about this size, and he actually sold one of them for like $1,400. That's how crazy.
That's crazy.
The beer market is nuts, but we'll get into beer.
I just had my most expensive beer ever. I don't want to sidetrack you up front, but I just had my first Dark Lord. If we're talking about hard to find beer.
Oh yeah, is that 3 Floyds?
3 Floyds. You have to buy a lottery ticket, and if you live in the area, it's not that hard. You just buy a ticket, show up on that one day. But outside of that one day, you have to turn to beer markets, beer trading circles. My girlfriend's brother gave me some old Dark Lord. So this was a 2010 Dark Lord. Probably retails for $80 or $100 if I had sold it underground. My first Dark Lord, it was amazing.
Well, I hear good things about that one. It's Some of those beers are tough. Yeah, you have to go to the brewery and you have to, answer the questions 3 of the troll, the bridge, and all that stuff. And boy, I could totally be sidelined and talk about beer for an hour. That'd be totally fine
Yeah,
by me.
right.
I just
Yeah, but
I just
that's the other podcast, right?
I should just have a beer podcast at some point. Might as well get all this
I would be on that one
get
as
all
well.
this
Yeah.
knowledge for good, as they say. So last time we talked, we kind of covered your background, how you became the rich and famous pastor that you are today. But can we kind of do the quick version? Like how you grew up, religious, and then kind of becoming, getting the pastor position that you have now.
Yeah, well, I don't know, the short version, 20 seconds or 1 minute. My dad was a pastor, Church of the Brethren pastor. He actually, I like to say I was born Brethren, but I wasn't. He was something else. There's 2 general models for pastoral ministry. One is where people above the church level, say a bishop, tells you where to go and okay, go to this church now go to that church. And my dad got tired of being told where to go, and so he knew some brethren in the area in Lancaster County. There's an awful lot of brethren, so he reached out. And so I was about 6 months old when my family switched over, but I grew up with a Church of the Brethren pastor. And so it's not that I thought I footsteps. I suppose I did know it was an option, which maybe not everyone considers. How I got here, the short version would be to go back to high school, and I'm not going to do the 20 years since then, but I knew I wanted to live a meaningful life, and I just kind of looked at skill sets and passions I had. I was always very drawn to the idea of vocation, which is often set in a spiritual way, but you can describe it in an agnostic way too, just to say that your job should be the summary of your passions and your gifts and your talents, right? And so I kind of looked at that and I said, well, I love people, I love community, I love making community, I love doing special events, I love planning, I love interacting, and it was all these kind of things. And so I thought, well, what can I do? And so I thought, well, I might teach high school choir, or maybe I could be a pastor. And eventually I decided to be a pastor, and much eventually later I became a pastor. So it's been 5 years, and I'm in a program where I can do the seminary while I'm still pastoring. So I pastor a small church in a pretty small town that no one's ever heard of, and I'm I don't know, a third of the way through a master's degree.
So what's it like to be in a small town when you're pretty close to Chicago? I don't know exactly how far you are, but it's reachable.
I'm almost exactly 100 miles. And so if you're familiar with Chicago, there's 88 that kind of starts at the south end of the city and runs straight west along the state. If you're actually from Chicago, that's a poor description, but it gives a general map for some people. So I'm 100 miles straight west of Chicago, right off of 88. I don't have an exit, but my church is only maybe 2 miles from 88, 100 miles out. But it's a farming town. It's really interesting. So yeah, I can drive an hour and be in Aurora or Naperville or some of these much bigger and more famous towns. If you're not familiar with Chicago, Aurora is where Wayne's World was famously shot, right? I'm only an hour and a half from Woodfield Mall and all of these kind of more familiar things. But I live in a town of farmers. Their their jobs in high school and college, or the summers at least, was farming. If they didn't farm, their brother did, their best friend did, their uncle did. And so it was very shocking. Like my first few weeks of being out here in town, a friend of mine had tickets to see someone at Ravinia, which is this outside nice place. And she goes, man, I hope it doesn't rain tonight. Rain would just ruin this beautiful night. And then the next morning I woke up and I went down to the diner. We call it the diner. And everyone was talking about not just how much rain we got. It's this, if you're from suburbia, it's almost hard to describe. They wanted to know, did you get 1/8? Did you get 2/8? Did you get 3/8? And what time? Was it from 4 to 5? Was it from 4 to 7? Was it in the morning? And these are people who might live half a mile away from each other or a quarter of a mile away from each other, and they still want to know what you got as opposed to what I got, as opposed to what Jim got a mile down the road. And just a very much more organic relationship with the land and each other in a way that's been appreciated. The other really interesting thing since the election has been, when you live in a small town, your relationship is based off the fact that you live in a small town together. And so we have diverse views in my church about who people voted for and how we think about everything going on. But we stay in relationship, that we keep talking to each other, we keep liking and respecting each other. Maybe there's topics we've learned to avoid at times, but that's been kind of nice in some ways. Being in a small town, it's very friendly. Everyone knows each other. You're not anonymous as you walk around town. These are all things I appreciate. It has been difficult that there's not a lot of people I can talk football with or beer with. And it's almost entirely white and older. And so it's kind of a mixed bag, but it's a nice stepping stone early in my career. I don't mean it like that. I mean, like, just starting out, it's a lovely place to be. I embrace it for here. And there's some things I love about it, but it's not truly like home either.
Well, if your members of your church are able to disagree and still get along, maybe are there any lessons you can pass on to the atheist community? Because right now people seem to be a little bit disagreeing with each other about seemingly nothing, but you know.
Yeah, I don't, to be honest, because it's we're able to focus on the rest of our life together, like the 3 or 4 issues that probably wouldn't go well if we talked about them. We just don't talk about them that often, and we can talk about other things in life, how our days are, how our weeks are, how is your daughter doing? I know she had surgery last week. There's a couple people in my church that have cancer, and let's make you a meal this Wednesday, or I'll stop by Tuesday morning and hang out with you. So we're able to talk about the relational life stuff and focus on the parts that go well between us. But if all we ever did was get together and talk about those specific things that we don't disagree on, it might be a different story as well for us.
Well, I just spent a week with family on the beach, and there is a different way, I think, of communication versus friends, and then maybe friends who are more internet friends who are not as afraid to just tell it like it is when it might not be the right time to tell it like it is.
Right.
Or the way you tell it does happen. So I can see that having that foundation probably helps out. Are you still part-time officially?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the church, I mean, it's pretty small. We have 15 to 20 on a Sunday, which is about the average church size in our area for small churches in small towns. So I'm half-time, and my largest responsibility is Sunday worship. For the atheists out there, you may not realize, but a Sunday worship service, even in my case, for 15 people, it's a 1-hour service. This is, if I'm inspired and everything goes perfectly, maybe a dozen hours of work. Realistically, it's 20 hours of work. And so that's the biggest part of my job. I also do a lot of relationship and vision with them, make sure they're on track, check in with everyone. Of course, if they're in the hospital or get sick, that's extra work. And but the biggest thing I do is worship on Sunday.
Do you have any kind of volunteer help?
So there's a saying, we say it in church culture, but I don't think it's a church saying. I'm pretty sure it's a universal truth that 90% of the work is done by 10% of the people. This 90-10 thing comes up a lot, where you might even say you're going to spend 90% of your energy on the most troubling or most high maintenance 10% of your community. And that's true if you're, a restaurant manager, if you're a fantasy football site owner. This is just kind of a universal truth. So the nice thing about the smaller church setting is a lot of people pitch in. So some days I feel like 90% of the work is being done by 50 or 60% of the people. But the reality is there probably is 10% that does significantly more than other people at times. Those are the volunteers that you're referring to, the people who, it's easier in small town life too. What we would call a deacon ministry in the church, some leaders in the church who might visit people when they're sick or check in when they're having bad days, things like that. That's a little more natural in the routines of small town life. Some people play cards every single Sunday night. It's kind of a natural check-in without being forced. But there's a lot of things that I've passed on that they've done a lot of since before I got here, and even more since.
Yeah, I figured there was a big part of that, since you're the guy in charge, but you can't do it all. So Hal, you mentioned it earlier. You talked about you're working your way through seminary and working on your master's. How's that going? Mm-hmm. And did you finally get past the spoiler alerts and figure out how Revelations ended?
Well, Revelations is probably a whole other podcast, but short version, I disagree strongly with the mainstream, particularly evangelical fundamentalist interpretations out there. Seminary is going great. I actually love it. It's nice when you can be passionate about education, whatever the topic is, and this is something I'm very passionate about. There's a couple classes that are like, okay, I'm in school, I'm taking this required class, but for the most part, they're works of passion. And so, plus my seminary is cool. Here's just today, I got an email. I signed up for classes in the fall, and then I got an email from my teacher today. The class is called Science Fiction and Theology. And I'm stoked. They offer this class every other year, and so I snatched it up right away. And you've seen books like when Lost was popular, they would do they wouldn't call it theology, the worldview of Lost. I don't know what the titles of the books were. They've done it for Peanuts. They've done it for all these popular things through time. And so that's kind of, the professor's a nerd, but it's great. He and I get along great. He's a Cubs fan. We like a lot of similar shows. And so he's actually the dean of the seminary. We get along really well because we have so much common interest to talk about. And the email was summer viewing. Dozens of episodes from all these things, try to watch as much as possible. And I'm looking at it, and I've watched 100% of it already. It's like dozens of, Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars, Firefly, the show and the movie, multiple Star Trek shows. It's the newer Battlestar Galactica, or I'm sorry, Babylon 5 is what I meant to say. Just all these shows. I'm like, seen it. It would, I'm sure. Now I'm gonna check after we're done. I don't think that was on the list, but it could be. Yeah.
It's got the whole humanity creates artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence says, and they reverse it too in Battlestar Galactica. The humans believe in multiple gods, and the artificial intelligence believes in one. So they say, "Gods damn it," during the show, which it's a different way.
Yeah,
and I did see funny. I know the Lost. At least one of the creators is, I think, pretty religious, because there was definitely a religious thing toward the end. Spoiler alert! So many spoiler alerts we could do tonight for the show. So when are you on track? When is it going to be done?
Well,
and then. What do you have an idea for what your thesis will be? Because that's
I don't. As a Master's of Divinity student, that's the standard pastoral degree. You typically don't write a thesis, so to speak. That's more of a Master of Arts. You would write a thesis, or of course a doctorate. You would write a thesis, but there's not one thesis I have to write. There is a class called Masters of Divinity, MDiv Review, at which I have to submit kind of a summary of my work, but I don't, it's not a thesis. I can turn in essays I've already written for other classes as here's the work I've been doing. So if I were a full-time student, it's a 3-year degree, and I don't know why seminaries have decided that seminary degrees should be harder than, I mean, academically, I don't know, but in terms of volume, like some MBAs might be 40 or 50 credits, depending on where you go. And my MDiv degree is 84 credits, and some are higher. There's probably nowhere you can go to get an MDiv degree that's under 60 or 70 credits, and I'm at 84. So if I were full-time, I'd be in my second year. So I'm optimistically hoping I have 3 years left, but maybe 4 is realistic. I'm kind of half-timing it, so to speak.
Okay, seeing where you are, and we're about 20 minutes in, so I'm going to go ahead and do my first live read. So I have been invited to a podcaster session at the Secular Saturday one-day conference coming to Chattanooga on July 22nd. That's Lexi and Brian of Scenic City Skeptics are part of the group running it. Go to facebook.com Secular Saturday. I'll send the link in the show notes. Also want to say hello to Hillary, one of my new fans I got in touch with on Facebook. The problem with being off for a week was that I had Facebook on my phone, but for some reason Facebook wouldn't let me post on my personal page at all during the week. Every time I tried to post, it says, no, you have to schedule it. And then when I scheduled it, it never happened. So it was a quiet week on the page. So that's why I'm trying to get on this show as quickly as possible. We got to talk about your well-dressed ways. So did you do a special tie knot for me? And what is this whole, I don't even know if we got into this last time. I don't know why I wouldn't ask it since it's one of your signatures. What's up with the whole tie thing? And how does that go with the simple dress of Church of the Brethren?
The joke, for those unfamiliar with Church of the Brethren, we're Anabaptist, A-N-A. We're not anti-Baptist. We're one of 3 historic peace churches with some churches that are more well-known, Quakers and Mennonites. And so we have some close connections even to the Amish. And so we like to joke that the Church of the Brethren we're only a broken light bulb away from being Amish. We're pretty mainstreamed, but we're only 50 or 60 years removed away from plain dress, as we call it, being quite common. Even in the history of my church, 50 years ago, men and women would sit on different sides. Anyway, so thus the plain dress kind of joke. So this goes back to kind of high school for me. I had to tie some ties, and my dad showed me how to tie a tie, and I tied at the time what was called a 4-in-hand. And it just struck me even at the time as, I don't know, something you should take pride in. And so looking back at them, I tied these tiny little crappy 4-in-hand knots, but I still wanted to make sure it was tied well relative to other ties. And I would even in school do I was on the speech team. I'd help other people retie their ties to make sure they looked a little bit better. And so it was always kind of something I took pride in, even if I was tying what I would now call a crappy knot. And then fast forward to, say, the last 6 or 7 years when I've tied a lot more ties. And I've started off taking pride in decent 4-in-hands, and then I started saying, well, how else can you tie a tie? And I would look up like a full Windsor, a half Windsor. I tried some of these things. And at some point, I just thought, there's a whole world of tie knots out there. And I like wearing ties, but if I'm going to wear a tie this often, then let's have some fun with it. So it's taken me a lot of work and a lot of time, but now I might have to, if you gave me like half an hour to kind of brush up in my head and then tested me, I could probably tie about 15 different tie knots from memory. And I'm to the point when I start just kind of making them up. So if you have a Facebook page, I'll send you a picture if you want to post my tie from last Sunday. I'm particularly proud of it. Also, taking photos of ties is hard. I'm getting better at taking photos of ties. And so the photo turned out good. It's probably one of my better tie knots I've done. I just made it up. I'm not even sure I could retie it, but when you see it, it's stellar. But it's also very gaudy. It's grandiose. It's look at me. It's not plain as you might think. And so that is where you're out of. I actually remember telling you the story. I remember what story I told you, and you said the quote. But that's where the quote comes from. You said earlier, craftsmanship is always appreciated. So here's my see if I can. It's not showing up well with the lighting, but this is a there you go. This is a knit tie. You can buy knit ties in the store. This is kind of different because a friend did this for me. I said that knit ties were getting bigger, and she said she would make me one, and I guess she knits a lot. So it's not showing up well with the lighting, but this is just an Eldridge, but with this big, thick, gaudy knit tie. So it's this just, I love it. It's just, I mean, this is grandiose. This is show off territory, but sometimes that's okay too. I would not wear this to, say, a funeral. But for Zach's podcast,
they're more formal versions of. I have a bad tying history in that I didn't learn to tie till maybe after college. So I had like a neighbor because my dad was out of town actually tie a tie for me, and I had it pre-tied for I don't know how many years.
Yeah, a lot of people do that.
Until I finally tossed it. And I do whatever my brain can remember one knot version if I have to wear a tie because it's about once a year. I have one of those bow ties that is automatically, I wear that. I was going to wear it tonight, but I couldn't find it.
Well, you got the. So for a couple of years, I don't work on it a lot, but a few times a year I brush it out. I'm working on a creative nonfiction writing piece about ties. And one of my statements in there is I say, if you tie one knot and you don't know what it is, it's probably the four in hand. And so that's probably what you're tying. But part of my vantage point on ties, it's this thing that we pass on. And it also says something about what you do. The fact you don't even know what you're tying. I know that you don't have a job that you tie ties a lot, right? I know that your dad probably didn't have a job that he tied ties a lot. Or he might have made sure, assuming he was around in your life, to pass this on to you the way he learned to do it. And so, and when I watch TV, I'm always looking at how wardrobe people dress, and some shows get it right and some shows don't. And it's just always fascinating to me. But the thing that we pass on, the small thing we take pride in, I don't know. I'm trying to develop this whole philosophy of tie knots in my head.
So could you be like a tie consultant for like a TV show?
I have considered it. I would, yeah.
And pastor, because for as well as atheists come off on TV shows and movies, usually when there's a priest character, I mean, I'm thinking of the TV show Preacher, which of course was over the top in a comic book, but usually the preacher's, not always the best character in terms of morals,
Depends on the show. There's some, I suppose, much like atheists, it depends on the show and who's making it and what role they're playing. There are some fascinating pastors. There are some fascinating priests, and there are some awful priests. Much like atheists are sometimes typecast as, this pigeonhole annoying quack, and other times they're the smart ones in the room and the only one talking sense. And so you kind of see it all.
Yeah, it's true. And I don't know, it makes me think of how on TV shows they can never have like a happy couple. Like the couple has to get together and then something's got to blow them apart. Like the only show I can remember of a long-term couple working was like Friday Night Lights, and that was totally weird. It was the coach is gonna get flirted with by somebody, or there's like nothing.
That was the single most realistic marriage I've ever seen on TV.
And they're able to fight and get along. And
yes, they fought and get along. Yeah, and typically what you see on TV are awful marriages or fairy tale marriages. And I thought Friday Night Lights did a unique job of showing, it's not perfect. And we can fight, but it was also good. It was a good marriage, as we would call it. Now, I'm not married, so maybe some people could tell me that it was still too picture perfect, but I think it did a better job than other TV shows had done.
Although I do like I think it was on the Amy Schumer show where they did like a parody of it, and she was holding this like giant glass of wine because the character almost always is at home drinking a bunch of wine. I'm like, yeah, a friend of mine has a glass that big. The weirdest thing about Friday Night Lights is the actual football part was usually the most unrealistic because they would always have to do like a 50-yard touchdown to win every single week. And this is a team that almost never passed the ball. Or their quarterback clearly could not throw the ball more than 5 yards. But then
Except for that game winner every week.
But I know how you have to do that for drama's sake. And it was based on a true story. I'm impressed because it was a book. There was a movie. There's a TV show. There's not a lot of books that can go that far. Gosh, where are we? I gotta get back on track. Good. Where are my questions? What's going on here?
Yeah, right. I mean, I was gonna ask you about Bloodlines, but let's get back on track instead.
I haven't seen that. I know it's the same guy.
Same guy. I think it's the best Netflix show.
Kyle Chandler, right?
He's Coach Taylor. I don't know what to tell you. It's. I've seen 5 or 6 of the Netflix shows, and it's the best one to me. And anyways, I'm thinking about it because the new season comes out in just a couple days.
Well, I just got blown away as someone who used to just get the discs. We got a Netflix connection so we could watch the Gilmore Girls reboot, and then found out that they were like 2 shows 2 years ago, and now there's 7,500 shows.
Yeah.
And so a month ago, I got like a week of it. I'm like, I can't even start a show, let alone try to finish one. I mean, the only thing that's an advantage now is most shows aren't 22 season episodes. You can kind of get through, and that's the point, and I understand that. So this happened a while back. I remember you mentioning on Facebook. How did the National Church of the Brethren meeting go? Because there seemed to be a little bit. I mean, I could imagine there being disagreement between religious people. I mean, I know you have the truth and all, but sometimes.
Well, not well.
You don't get along.
So I'm going to give you I'm just going to talk for a while if I could.
That's why you're here. Go for it.
One of the unique things the Church of the Brethren does, and I'm going to paint it in the best possible light to begin with. And even while I do that, some of you will see the obvious flaws in what I'm saying, and then I'll be more honest. But in the best possible light, one of the unique things that we do, and I think it's beautiful, is we have what we call an annual conference. It's once a year. We get together every summer, usually around 4th of July, because conference space is discounted at that time. At least that's what we've been doing for a few decades. Ooh. Can you still hear me?
Yeah,
there we go.
Turn the sound off for a second.
Oh, no, you can turn it off. I
mute for burps most of the time.
Oh.
I'm classy, people.
You're classy. So this is a business meeting, and it's turned into a social thing. They said, well, if people are coming and having business, let's also have children's programs. And so it's this big social affair, but it's centered around business. And so each church sends delegates, and there are denominational committees and teams that just kind of decide, that write the things that delegates might vote on. But there's a whole process of how an individual church can get a piece of business to annual conference, and then how delegates that churches send to annual conference vote. And sometimes it's pastors, but sometimes it's lay people. And this is there's a couple unique things here that yes, there might be, say, a volunteer committee of 5 people that spend 2 years writing a paper because they were asked to. But it's delegates that vote on whether or not they accept the paper as an official statement. And this is not a pope. This is not a team of pastors. This is not bishops, right? This is not church hierarchy. This is Zach. If you were a member of a Church of the Brethren and they would say, why don't you be our delegate this year? You'd have to be a member, but they would commission you to go and you could vote. And so that's really unique, and I appreciate that. It says something about who we are. The other nice thing, it says something that once a year we get together and we talk about these issues, which on the best of days says something great about who we are as well, that we value community that much. So that's the best possible light and some insight into who the Church of the Brethren uniquely are. The problems are We don't. It's a very diverse group. I mean, you're bringing people from South California. You're bringing people from Seattle. You're bringing people from the Bible Belt, and you're bringing people from Maine, and you're putting them all in one room, conservative and liberal, gay and straight, and asking them to discuss serious topics. And it doesn't always go well. Some conferences we're reminded how much we love each other, and some conferences we're reminded how much we disagree. And so this last conference was particularly difficult, to be honest. The short version of what happened is that there was a small conservative faction who had the right jobs in the right places who basically just said, we can drag the denomination to the right. And they tried. And thankfully, in the end, they failed. But the fact that the effort was so publicized, the fact that so many people were in support, and we had to sit around and discuss it for days, primarily on issues that shouldn't shock anyone. But this particular issue was about how to handle ministers who do same-sex weddings, and should there be a disciplinary process. And so I won't get into church polity and bore everyone, but it's hard when the not agreeing thing you mentioned about the atheists, I very much feel that right now. There are times that conferences don't go well, and it's the last 15 years. The conferences that haven't gone well are almost 100% about issues of sexuality. And some people are nervous because so last conference ended on a decent note, even if it was a tough conference. But then the item was left as open business. So there is a new proposal that's a more centric, moderate proposal for this coming conference, and it's in Grand Rapids, which was a site of a very bad conference about a decade ago. It was really, some atheists are going to be like, I knew I hated the church after this, but just some funny stories from that conference. Some people who are open and affirming is the term we use. We love gay people. And so sometimes we have little name badges. There's little rainbow stickers they might put on their name badges. But because the tone of conference was so negative, you started to see some rainbow scarves and shawls and even shirts. And then in a conservative response to this, they started wearing black and white. And so you had some people walking around conference in rainbow clothing and some people walking around conference in black and white clothing. And so even the conference office this is how bad it got. The conference office had to issue statements about dress policy just so that we could get along with each other. And at the time, the name of the center didn't mean much to us, but now we're going back to Grand Rapids with this piece of open business that may go well, may not go well. And of course, if you're familiar with Grand Rapids, you know that half the things in town are named after a rich family from that town who has donated a lot of money to that town. Means something a little bit different to us today. So the Grand Rapids annual conference this summer hosted at the DeVos Center or the Davos Center. I don't know how to say it, but
oh yeah.
So I'm told you can't live in Grand Rapids and avoid that name. Like if your kid is sick, you go to the DeVos
Michigan,
Children's
right?
Hospital. Yeah, it's Michigan, where she's
then you're
from.
Gonna have quality beer available, right?
Oh yes, I have a seminary friend of mine from Grand Rapids, actually a married gay seminary friend of mine from Grand Rapids who, I forget the local names, City of Breweries or something that makes me very happy. And so I'm excited to, I think they have some founders there and a whole bunch of little microbreweries too.
Bell's Founders. They're quite a bunch there.
Michigan beer is my favorite. Michigan beer is my favorite beer.
Like I can't name 2 beers from Alabama, but I can name a bunch from Michigan. That's just the way it is.
Well, you got New Holland. New Holland isn't my favorite. Bell's and Founders are probably 2 of my 3 favorite breweries right there, both from Michigan.
I know, and I went for New York tonight. It just seemed like the right thing.
Yeah.
Well, we're about 40-ish minutes in, so I'll do my second live read. I gotta give love to the patrons. People donate money to the show. So to learn, because I know Matt wants to know what you can do with a used butter tub, listen to No Religion Required's interview with Trey Crowder, the liberal redneck, was on their show about 2 weeks ago, and learn about his name background and where that came from. And also, Marissa is writing a new book, so you should check out the 100th episode of Inciting Incident, which will come after the 100th episode of my show. Just because you get there first doesn't mean that you won, right, Marissa? And you know who's going to be the special guest at the 100th episode? Former Minnesota Vikings punter Chris Kluwe. So there's a football connection.
Real, I like him.
He read the foreword for her book, so that was cool.
That is cool.
I haven't read his book, Sparkle Ponies.
I just like how, I don't actually know him that well, but I've learned the last, not just 6 months, but few years to appreciate his outspoken nature, which I guess is a long-standing thing for him, but I started noticing more recently.
It seems like more sports guys are being outspoken, but of course, Kluwe got more notice because he was a punter. No one noticed him, but then once he was out of the league, then he got a little more attention. So when it comes to beer, don't know if we got into this last time. I'll keep asking this about questions I probably asked. Are there particular styles you go for, or do you just run the gamut? And do you like your local stuff, or are you like me when you go to a new city? You're like, I have to see what is there. What can I try?
Oh, traveling is the best. So I'm a beer snob. I mean, I cannot. When I first became a beer snob, I said to myself that I did not. That yes, I will drink better beer, but that I would also still drink, Bud or whatever happened to be around. And that is not what happened. If I walk into a bar and I say, "What's your best beer?" and they say, "Well, we have like Michelob," or, I'd be like, "I'll have water, thank you." Oh yeah, but I like to think of myself as easygoing, but I'm a beer snob, and so there's always that tension of like, I don't mean to be this guy, but do you have any craft beer? And they would, you've probably had this conversation. Oh, well, we got some like 312, or we got some. No. That's not craft beer. Anyways, so when
Blue Moon.
Blue Moon. Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, it's not bad, but that's not a craft. So traveling is great. Well, I don't disagree. I was trying to give credence to the lesser beer drinkers out there. Traveling is great. So like I went to Nashville this last summer, and I was trying to look cool with some local people I was around with, and but I'm a beer snob, and so I would just say, "What's local?" It's kind of a very slick way. People say, "Oh, well, this brewery's right here." It's kind of a nice, easy way to drink some new beers without sounding like a beer snob. But that trip was also great because I don't even remember, but like in a week, or probably in 2 weeks, I probably tried 50 or 60 new beers, or maybe it was 30 new beers, but it was an awful lot because everywhere you go, it's new. And so I would get a flight or two at places, and each single one was a new kind of local regional beer. So I am a drink local fan. I like my Chicago beers when I'm in Chicago. There's some really good ones. This is just the next state over that I'm drinking right now, and Chicago has some really good breweries, and Wisconsin beer is pretty good. I'm just right next to the border there too. But as I travel, watching the beer mix shift is a great joy for me.
Well, what do you think about the craft breweries kind of selling out? Like Goose Island in Chicago has sold out to InBev, which is Anheuser-Busch.
2011. While ago.
But their Bourbon County Stout is still a very coveted beer. I just made a trade. Hi, Jeannie. She's listening. She gave me some. She sent me some Vermont beers at a conference we went to, and I was able to trade the last one I had for 2 Bourbon County Stout barley wines. And I've never had that version. I don't even think they sold that version in my state. And I did check to find out they were not the ones that went bad. They're very strong.
Oh, that was one isolated. I mean, it happened, but it was it 2 years ago or something? They had a problem, and it wasn't a big problem before, and they changed their processes to make sure it wouldn't happen again. Yeah, the variants used to be hard to find, but this year they were easier to find. So Goose Island is funny. average beer is pretty average. I mean, if you like Blue Moon, then like 312 is kind of there. That's the old and biggest Chicago area code, 312. And then your phone number. I mean, it's not Blue Moon, but if you think Blue Moon is good, you'd think 312 is good. It's a wheat beer. It's not bad, but the quality of the brewery has suffered greatly since selling out. They did try to revitalize their image with coming out with their fancier beers, the Matilda, the Sophie. I'm blanking. I think there was 3 or 4. Those aren't bad. They're better than the rest of their beers. But they still do the Bourbon County, which is an enormous profit center for them. They do it to make money, to be clear, but that is a stellar beer. So even if I hated Goose Island, I would still drink the crap out of their Bourbon County. It's a tough thing. I can't fault breweries for succeeding, right? I mean, like you have, I don't know how to say it, Elysian? I don't know how to say it.
Seattle, yeah.
Yeah, out in Seattle. And that was Seattle's version of Goose Island, is what I understand. And about 2 years ago or so, they sold to InBev as well. And it's hard to fault someone for succeeding and fault someone for taking a crap load of money to retire. So, but as a craft beer guy, it makes me a little sad too. So I don't fault them, but it is sad because quality does suffer. And it's a natural thing. It's no one's fault. When you mass produce things, you have to add more chemicals. So these are all things that craft beer people are familiar with. You have to add more chemicals so it can sit longer, and you change processes so it's less of an art form and more of a manufacturing form. And anyways, but there are good examples here too. You have Lagunitas, right? They sold 40%, I think. I forget who. Not InBev. Someone very big. So they still have
Heineken one.
I'm honestly not sure.
There are a few big ones in there.
Yeah, there's
mostly
a few
international,
but they still have a controlling share. But because they sold, they get better distribution. Even the diviest dump bars I'm in will usually have one Lagunitas beer, and the quality has almost not changed. The price went up like just $1 or $2 for a 6-pack, which isn't bad. Just it's a small little bump. But the quality is almost identical, and so they've been able to expand while keeping that nice craft taste. I'm not a fan of the selling out, but I get it. How do you feel?
Well, they just had, because I was in Hickory, North Carolina, which is about 2 hours away from Asheville, which is a big beer center in the east, and Wicked Weed is a local sour place, and they just sold. And people were so pissed. Like, they actually had an invitational they were going to do where a bunch of breweries were invited. They had to shut it down because as soon as they sold, everybody just said, I'm out.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And even local places were doing like, hey, we're selling cellared old versions of their beers. And people are like, no. It's like, they've really turned on them. I feel like somehow Goose Island, well, I guess because Bourbon County is so popular. Yeah, people still go after it, but their normal beers, I mean, people weren't drinking them anyway.
Well, they also tried to rehab their image, as I said. With they kind of recognized, hey, the view of the rest of our beers have changed. So instead of trying to rehab that image, let's repackage some stuff. And so they, I don't know if you get them down there, the Matilda, the Sophie, and I think there's another one or two. They're not bad. Yeah. And it's a fancier label. It's just the way it's marketed and packaged is more as a, do you want this fancy beer?
Well, you can, the advantage, and I swear non-beer lovers, I'll be done quick. The advantage of there being so many good craft beers is you don't have to stand in line for a Bourbon County Stout or a Kentucky Bourbon Stout. You can find something like Founder's Dragon's Milk that's available year-round. That's really good, and that's been my good luck charm. I drank 2 of those for the last 2 Nashville Predators wins, and when the next game came up and they didn't have it at the store, I had to go with Anderson Valley. It was like a wild turkey aged one.
I've had that too. Another good one.
It wasn't quite as good, and they lost. So you got to stick with it. I'm actually.
But you're talking my language.
Closet. I'm saving them. The
You're
bourbon
talking
ones,
my language with the bourbons, though.
I'm learning.
Yeah.
But let's talk about. So let's try a transition here. So quality going down.
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about our president. So you talk a lot about Trump.
Yeah,
Trump comes up quite often on your Facebook feed.
yeah.
What's it like talking about it openly with your congregation, and how do they take to your un-Trumpian ways?
Well, um, so first of all, if it needs to be said to you atheists out there, uh, for those listening only on audio, Zach just unashamedly slamming the beers at this point.
I'm done.
If this needs to be said to you atheists out there, not all Christians are evangelical, and not everyone's a fan of what's going on. On average, in northern Illinois, for the Church of the Brethren, probably over half of us are really not fans of what's going on. Of course, that percentage would shift as you travel across the country for or against, but it's been hard. It's been really hard. My job, I'm torn. Part of me craves a congregation where I can just be open and honest. You see me on Twitter, which is my catharsis and self-education about current events. You see me on Facebook, which I'm much more unleashed on Facebook than I ever would be with my pastor hat. I mean, you kind of always have the pastor hat on, but I'm much more guarded when I'm in church, or definitely from the pulpit or around some church people. So part of me craves for a setting where I can just stand up in a pulpit and say, hey, this travel ban is not Christian and it's immoral and we will not support this. And just to say that, pastoring a small church in a small town, it's a little bit different. Like, my job is to be in their living room when their spouse dies. You know what I mean? And so I can't alienate people. So that's a serious note. To get back to more jovialness, I like to joke that like half the job of a pastor is just learning how to say things in a way that won't turn people off immediately. Just that sometimes you can just say a phrase a certain way and someone will say, oh, he said that word, I'm out. And so you just kind of spend a lot of time and energy learning the words to say and the words to not say. And I am less guarded than many pastors. I still joke around and have a out there personality, but it's still something I think a lot about. So I'm very careful from the pulpit. And the first, some funny notes that people may or may not be aware of. There's this thing called a lectionary. Zach, are people familiar with a lectionary?
Not sure.
Okay, so there is I don't follow it. Not everyone does, but there exists a 3-year schedule of what churches should talk about on Sundays. Some churches or denominations mandate that churches and pastors follow it. My church does not mandate that we follow it, and I choose not to. But sometimes I'll look at it for inspiration. The point of it is to make sure you're covering the whole Bible, so that you're not just focusing on your few favorite scriptures over and over again, that you're covering every story. And there's several. I mean, every week there's 6 verses. And so if one doesn't speak to you, pick another one, right? Anyways, the lectionary that lined up with January 20th. Now, this is a universal schedule that's printed years ahead of time, and I believe it just rotates over and over again ad infinitum unless there's a change. So this is a long-standing thing. Coincidentally, you atheists might say, the scriptures right after the inauguration for the next 2 or 3 weeks, it was so difficult to not like openly anti-Trump every sermon. Like what was it? The travel ban was on like a Friday night, right? And so you had Friday night, all of Saturday, and then Sunday morning we had to get up and preach on blessed are the peacemakers, the weak shall inherit the earth. You know, like, I think the Old Testament scripture was Micah 6:8. What does God require of us but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God? And so like, how do I preach about reaching out to the weak, reaching out to the other, loving everyone, doing justice? And that is the call of faith. That was the lectionary text, like the first 2 or 3 weeks after everything. And then on Saturday, no Muslims can enter the country. I know that's not what happened, but I'm just trying to tell a story. And so anyways, it was very difficult to not just get up and say, guys, this is wrong. I did the best I could. I do the best I can as a pastor to say what I want to say. So to give you an example, and this is not about Trump, but it's an example. I am very affirming. I am a huge ally of the LGBTQI community. In my particular church, I can't say that from the pulpit because I'll alienate people that disagree with me. And again, I have to be at the hospital when they get sick, and I don't want them mad at me. So, but I find ways to talk about it without talking about it. Like, I talk about loving everyone without exception. I talk about welcoming everyone without asking any questions. I tell a lot of stories about, Jesus reached out to the Samaritan woman, and Jews and Samaritans never would have talked, and men and women never would have talked, but Jesus reached out, and Jesus touched the leper. And no one would have touched a leper, but he touched the leper. This is our call, is to reach out to those marginalized, those most at risk, the other, as my seminary professors would say. And so I'm not talking about gay people, I'm not talking about refugees, or I'm not talking about immigrants, but aren't I? And so that's currently how I present it and package it. While I'm in church with my pastor hat strictly on, part of me does long for a day when I can just be more open. And not that the pulpit should be partisan. I think that's a huge problem on the right now, and has been for decades. But those roosters have really come home to no. Something came home to roost, whatever that saying is. Hens? I don't know. Anyways, but right is right, and wrong is wrong. And as Christians, there are things that we shouldn't support and things that we should support. And loving everyone, accepting everyone, welcoming everyone in our doors, no matter their color or sexual preference. I mean, to me, this is this is the gospel. This is Christianity 101 to me, almost. And so I preach those basics without always saying outright what I mean. And I hope that I can move the needle a little bit. In like, if I just said to someone who is more conservative, being gay is okay, they would say you're wrong, and the conversation's over, and they might not call me when they have a bad day like they need to, right? But if I instead say, God calls us to love, God calls us to welcome, and etc., then maybe I can bring them probably not to the left, but a little closer to the center, and they'll still call me. And so that's how I try to handle it now. And I'm nervous about some of my Facebook posts. Twitter, that's Twitter, but on Facebook, I think a lot about, should you still be talking about this? But I've been trying to be really aware of my privilege. I am a cis male, I'm straight, and I'm white, and I'm Christian. And so what the hell do I care if this travel ban happens, or if trans protections are stripped away, or et cetera, right? Because I'm not black, I'm not gay, but what if I were? And why does the fact that I got kind of the gene, I'm not going to say won the gene lottery, but why should my privilege, the fact I live in a nice town, the fact I had a good upbringing, the fact I am white and straight, I don't know. So I'm trying to be more aware of my privilege. So when I see something that negatively affects people, I try to care. Because it doesn't affect me, it affects someone. And I believe as Christians, as humans, we're supposed to have compassion and empathy for the experience of others.
And all this empathy, I don't think you're running for Republican office anytime soon.
I mean, have you seen, this is an old it made the rounds maybe a year ago. It was a Republican presidential debate, probably from like 1980 or something. And the two Republican presidential candidates on stage tried to outdo each other for showing compassion for refugees. Well, this is what I would do well, that's not enough. I would do this. Oh, I like that too. But here's this other thing that's even better. And it's been a while. It's, I don't know. I don't want to get too partisan on here, but this Republican Party of the last decade in particular, and I'm sure some people might assign different times or say I'm being too generous, but it's unrecognizable compared to even a decade ago, certainly compared to 20 years ago. And I'm not a conservative. There is a brand of conservatism I would respect, but I haven't seen it in Republican politics for a while now. I see it in some friends. I have some Republican friends, and I respect their positions. I'm always careful to talk about DC Republicans, to talk about national GOP platforms. But the reality, too, is that people are voting for them. And so, anyways, I do long for the day of compassion back in their way to politics on both sides.
Yeah, the whole meeting in the middle doesn't seem to work. And you say like DC Republicans, but I almost feel like local or worse. I mean, Georgia, we're kind of lame. Like, we always steal the dumb laws like the other state does RFRA, then a few weeks later, Georgia tries it. It's like we don't come with any original bigoted ideas. We just take the other states' ones. And I don't know about Illinois. Illinois is probably, I mean, you have your big city, but then it's kind of rural for most of the rest. You have a couple college towns, but it's not.
Well, state politics is also awful. You're correct. North Carolina is awful. Just North Carolina is awful. But I was happy. I'm going to get the facts wrong. I bookmarked some articles to read for the morning, but the point is their gerrymandering is racially based and illegal. Recent court ruling.
Yeah, it just happened today.
Yeah, and so I read like one or two articles and I bookmarked some more to read, so I apologize for not speaking intelligently on the matter. But yeah, state politics are awful. Texas is, I forget, but also trying to do something awful, not surprising for Texas. So when I say DC Republicans, it's my attempt to keep compassion and relationship for people I know who identify as Republican. I'm not trying to say it's only Republicans in DC that are awful. But I try to make a differentiation in my own head, let alone how I talk, that not every conservative is evil or bigoted or even knows what they're supporting sometimes, I think, to be honest. But I try to make that differentiation, but it's hard sometimes too. So that's why I do it.
Well, you get the big ticket, big C kind of Christian thing, but then it's like, wait, the Christians I know, they're not really in favor of this stuff, and they seem to be good people, and some of them like good beer, some drink Bud Light Ritas, but you can only do so much with those people. They don't actually like the taste. It's not the thing. Gosh, we're running, but maybe it's too late for this, but let's throw this in here. Do you have any questions for the atheists? Since that would be
Well, hold on. Are you, in this case, Zach, representing all atheists?
For the next few minutes, sure.
Okay.
I can do it.
First of all, I was unprepared for this question, or I might have smarter questions. So I'll ask this one and get the brain churning. Is Christianity generally respected by the average atheist? I'm sure you have a spectrum, and it's hard to say. A follow-up similar question is, how nuanced is the understanding of Christianity? Is there a common recognition that, yes, say mainstream evangelical Christianity writes the books and the music and has the radio and TV waves, but that's not everyone. It may be half or more than half, but that's not everyone. Actually, I think it's less than half, to be honest. But anyways, like, how nuanced are the understandings, and are we viewed as people not intelligent enough to see the light like you have, or is there sometimes a mutual respect and affection for differing views?
I think it's easy to say, oh, the people don't believe and don't think like I do are idiots, but
Mm.
there's more to it. I mean,
Yeah.
when somebody says something negative about Christianity, you're not just like if I say something negative about the Cubs, why would I? Because they're doing well of late. But you're not going to take it as personally as I might say something negative about Jesus,
Right.
telling you to leave your family and go with the sword and all that, and the world was going to end in a generation or two. Didn't happen. So I still believe that because we talked about 30,000 denominations last time, I think each person almost has their own version of Christianity. And maybe because it's so vague, it's able to survive because you can't pin it down and it keeps slipping. But there is such a difference between beliefs and individuals. So you can hate the belief and love the believer. And I think that's what you're trying to do is like the person, maybe not like what they follow. And
Right.
it's too individualistic. It's too to say that it's all bad. Because what you're doing is you're building a community. And that's
Yes.
something that occasionally atheists don't have. Because a lot of people come from a very strict religious upbringing and it's a negative thing to them. So to have that foundation but not with religion behind it doesn't always work for people because there's this thing called like Sunday assembly, which feels a lot like church, but it's just people getting together and singing
Yeah.
songs and stuff. Because it feels too churchy for someone who never even went to church as a child like me. It still gives me a little bit of the creeps, but for a lot of people, they really enjoy it. And some of us just get together at a place like Reason Con and all get drunk together and have a good time for a few days, and kind of we're able to relax because most of the time with this we can't. But I can't be negative when there's a Matt Rittle out there. How can I be negative? And all the people I know, my parents go to Catholic Church. They give money to the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church does a lot of bad things. No way I could say they're bad people.
Right.
That's just something they believe, and it's something that is very important to them. So you have to be a little ginger, but occasionally you want. That's why I have a Zachrilege Twitter account. I get to be a little more harsh on that than I am on my Zach Law Twitter account because it's mostly football and beer. But on this one, I can be a little more edgy because occasionally I need to get these things out. And I know you need to get certain things out. That's why you post stuff on Facebook that later you're like, well, it's fine. Because people, they don't,
It's pretty
most
accurate.
of it doesn't
It's pretty
stick. Not with us. But I don't even know. I just thought it would be cool to bring that up. And maybe because I did kind of put this together last minute, we can, work a little closer on formulating some quality questions for future shows.
I have
a
I have some notes now.
Here.
How long do we have? I have some notes on questions.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, what do you
Thought of some.
I'm getting.
Well, as a follow-up, you're feeling good after this was not my most pressing question, but it's a good follow-up for what you just asked. To be clear, I'm acutely aware of the failings of church. On a good day, churches do offer community. My church offers incredible community to each other. It's a source of great strength for everyone. And you mentioned that. And so my question is, I don't know, how do atheists work at community? Are you a little more fragmented, or are there ways? I'm familiar with, I call them atheistic churches. You call them the Sunday Fellowship. Outside of that, are there intentional efforts to create community in your life? Or I don't know if that's a personal question or a general question, but
I don't know. I feel like this show, and I apologize to my cat. I brought him up. So the last cats I had were perfectly fine being grabbed during shows. These cats are like, no, these lights and the heat, it's not for me. I don't know. For me, I haven't connected really well with local groups. I'm not sure why that is. I think because Atlanta's such a spread out city, I have to drive like 15 miles to go to a meeting, and there's one near me, but it's always Monday night, and I'm like, and it's at like 7 o'clock, and just it doesn't really. work convenience wise, but everybody there is great. So my community is like Facebook or Twitter. Although Twitter is weird. American Twitter atheists aren't as big. They're more Facebook people. And I just get invited to way too many groups there, so that's a little problem. So there's more of an online community for me. I know we all get together. We had this conference in North Carolina last month where like 500 of us got together, and that was a lot of fun. And it's kind of cool because it's about every big podcast you know about in atheism getting together. Like, imagine, I don't know how big you're into listening to Christian
Atheistic
podcasts,
podcasts.
or next.
I listen to the West Wing Weekly, and
or if you listen to, say, you're big into fantasy football podcasts. Imagine being able to run into like 200 of those people in a weekend. It was a lot of fun.
It's good, yeah.
But I don't know. It still hasn't quite. But for me, it's an individual thing. Like, it's a subject I don't necessarily want to think about 24/7 because it's kind of depressing. I mean, there was a Noah Legend mentioned a stat that there are basically like 80,000 Christians for every atheist in this country, or something like that. Yeah. So anytime you think, oh, I shouldn't be outspoken, it's like, well, there aren't that many people to be outspoken, so maybe it's needed, and there's certain times and places. But I've made some really good friends here. Sadly, the ones who are local I've seen in other cities more than not. And I just watched the first episode of West Wing when I got that Netflix thing. I'm like, I can't watch the whole show. It's like 75 episodes or something crazy.
Oh, someday. The first 4 seasons. Top 3 TV show I've ever seen. I'm addicted. I've seen it 40 times. Oh, it's good.
We got it, but we can't. I know you might have more questions, but I have to finish up, or at least sidetrack to this.
Okay.
Because the last thing we talked about last time we were together.
Okay.
I was being the arrogant atheist, and I was saying, ha, I'm a Chicago White Sox fan. We won the World Series when nobody watched it. And the Cubs, blah, blah, blah. Well, the Cubs, blah, 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 actually won. And I'll tell you, the first baseball game I've probably watched all the way through since the last game of the 2005 World Series was the last game of this World Series.
You're the reason.
I watched it all the way through. Well, it's like either Cleveland or Chicago are winning, and they've both been, like, Cleveland won in the 40s, and I think they might have beat Chicago. Anyway, Chicago hadn't won since 19-whatever.
It was, from a pure baseball point of view, an incredible series. Possibly 2 of the better teams of the year, which isn't what you always see. And no matter who won, you were breaking along. In fact, don't the Indians have the longest streak right now, losing streak in baseball? And so it was the longest and second longest. Yeah, right. And then it went to 7 games and extra innings, and it was. I'm glad the results, but I thought it was just good for baseball too.
Yeah, it was quite intriguing, and then playoff sports is different. Like I was at the beach. I watched playoff hockey every night because I'm from Pittsburgh. My parents live in Nashville, and both the Penguins and the Predators are in. And so every night there's a game, and every night it's crazy. You can't even imagine, like, someone who's into football. It's like it's one and done, but then in hockey you can play 7 games each round. In baseball you play 5 or 7 for 3 rounds. Guys are worn out by the end of that. It's like whoever's still standing.
Yeah, I remember an old hockey interview from I don't remember who or what or when, but it was they were saying from their first weigh-in at the playoffs to just a fun weigh-in afterwards, they'd lost 40 pounds. Hockey in particular, even more so than some of the other sports, that's a ton of physicality and a lot of ice time.
The beards are good, and before a Predators game last week, the entire Titans offensive line was there, and they all chugged a Bud Light. I'm sorry they chugged a Bud Light. I would hope they have better beer. Like at the Titans games, they did have one area where they had local beers, and then they got rid of it. I was like, come on, this is the one. I'll pay $10 for a local beer at a football game.
Wrigley has been a struggle. They had some 3-1-2 for a while, which is like a Chicago Blue Moon style, and I mean, it's not great, but at least it's not Bud, you know. And on the Bud note, and I'll go back to the Cubs thing, but it was funny after the GOP passed the AHCA in Congress, they cracked Bud on the Congress floor to celebrate. And I remember thinking, like, because I'm such a beer snob, and so at first I was like, Bud, that's what you're going to drink right now? And then that was kind of followed up with, yeah, that's what you deserve after this. Like, not a good beer.
And you're
Um,
celebrating a pretty negative thing
yeah,
overall.
well, I don't want to get side. Yeah, it's an awful thing. I want to talk about the Cubs thing some more because that's fun and exciting. Not that call your senators. Make sure the AHCA doesn't pass the Senate. That said, let's enjoy the Cubs moment. It's fun for me because I try to keep almost 100% dry. If someone wants to take a picture of me at a bar, I'll set my beer down. I drink. Anyone who knows me, I drink. I'm not hiding it, but I just don't. I don't know. It's just a public image thing. I don't need the questions. So, but I posted about a 7 or 8 minute Facebook live stream that coincidentally started. Just so I'm saying, it's 7 or 8 minutes long, but it shows my stress, and then you see me celebrating after they won. And if you watch it, I think it's pretty clear that I'm not 1 or 2 beers in at this point, and I scan around the bar. You even kind of get a shot of one of my beers, and so this is basically me drunkenly stressing out over the Cubs. Are we going to win or not? And it's such a great video. Just the timing of it was I won't say divine. I'm not that weird, but it was so perfect, just randomly. Like I even got to say, guys, it could be the next pitch. Seriously, this is where the point we're at. One good pitch, we win. One bad pitch, we lose. And it was only like 2 pitches after that they won. But I got to say that, and it was all perfect. Anyway, so it's just basically I try to not post about beer on Facebook, and here is me being drunk on Facebook. I'm hundreds of people. My seminary dean, my seminary professors are all like, dude, I was so jealous of you to be in a Chicago bar when that happened. I was in my living room. That's where I wanted to be. I got to share that with you. Thank you. And so at the best of highest of moments, and there's a special thing some sports fans can understand. I mean, I'm only 38, so I've only been waiting for this for 38 years, or you could argue for 32 or 35 years that I've loved the Cubs. And but how many things in our life are we willing to wait decades to happen and hope every year for decades, and then like receive the fulfillment of the heartache and promise? Like, I don't know. If you get married later in life, finding the one might be up there. But there's just not a lot of things like that. And so it was just like something changed within the inside too. Like, I mean, how many things will you wait 40 or 100 years for and then get it? It was pretty cool. It was a great day.
Yeah, that's what made me think. As someone who lived in Atlanta and watched that Super Bowl and the Patriots won, I was still like, they can't enjoy this as much as they enjoyed their first one. Like, no
Right.
matter the circumstances, like the White Sox winning in 2008, it had been 80 some years since they had won. That's probably not going to, it might happen again, though, considering how they've done since then.
Not with this owner.
But they did it, and it was a moment you didn't think was going to happen, and you need some of that in life to have this, oh man,
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah.
Things are possible, so it is good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my gosh, I was like, I don't know if we're gonna go a whole hour tonight. I'm gonna watch this hockey playoff game, which is already half over now. But I can fast forward through commercials, which is great. So, where can people track you down? I'll include links. I don't know if you just want to link people to your Facebook or your FF Rittle, the Twitter account, all that.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at FF Rittle, Rittle. I'll be up front with you guys. It's primarily political retweets and commentary these days. For those anti-Trump people, you may enjoy it. Any Trump atheists may not want to follow me on Twitter. It may not be your most enjoyable experience. That's where I'm on Twitter.
4 or 5 of them. Yeah, they're out there.
There's 4 or 5 of them, yeah. So, I mean, you can add me on Facebook. Just I usually don't add people I don't know, but just send me a message or something. Say hi first, and that's fine too. So,
So
the
you
nice
know
thing
Zach,
is,
and it'll be instantly blocked. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The nice thing about my Facebook friends, I have a lot of intelligent friends. They do run the gambit, and so when I post about non-Trump topics, you do kind of get an array of people pitching in, and on average, it's fairly intelligent and respectful discourse. I get a lot of compliments from people about other Facebook friends, and a number of them have even added each other sometimes. And so it's a fun place over there. And anyways, always as after what did you say episode? I don't have it written. 61, 62,
61.
61. Someone messaged me afterwards, and I chatted with them on Facebook for a while. So, love the conversation, love people. The door is open.
Excellent. Well, for people who want to support this show, be like Bobby, Hugh, Teody, and Marissa, and go to patreon.com/Zachrilege. It's even out there on the little spelling thing there, Zachrilege. Follow me on Twitter, Zachrilege, like the Zachrilege podcast page on Facebook. Send all hate mail or love mail. You can love to zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. Thank you again to Matt for being on tonight. For listeners, stay safe. If you want to chat, I'm available. If you're an atheist and feel alone, you're not alone. Reach out, let's chat, and get that human connectedness that keeps people coming back to see Matt every Sunday. Stay skeptical. I love all y'all. Good night and gongs.